All right. Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to be looking at cannabis plant categories.
Okay.
You might think it's as simple as just Indica, Sativa, hybrid,
Right.
but as we've got some sources here that are going to point out it's a lot more nuanced than that.
Absolutely.
We're going to be looking at some cool stuff like the role of ruderalis
Interesting.
and even how different growing techniques can change the final product of the plant.
It's pretty fascinating how they can, like, drastically change the plant's characteristics just by changing, like, the environment or something.
Yeah, and when you think about it, it's like any other agricultural product, like a tomato grown in one climate versus another climate is going to taste different.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to understand the whole process,
Yeah.
From seed to sale, like you were saying, like it's
Yeah.
all connected.
Well, let's jump in and let's start with the familiar stuff.
Okay.
Indica, sativa, hybrids.
The big three.
Yeah, the big three. What do we know about these and
Well, I mean, most people, when they think of indica, they think of like relaxation, calmness, that kind of like couch lock feeling.
yeah.
Whereas sativas are more known for being energetic, uplifting, good for creativity or socializing.
Right.
And then you have hybrids, which kind of blend the two. So you can get a wide range of effects depending on the specific hybrid.
Yeah, and it is interesting how those three terms, have really become like the shorthand.
Yeah, they're kind of like the starting point.
Yeah, for cannabis.
Yeah,
But it's, as our sources point out, it's not always that simple.
right. It's way more complex than that.
There's so many other things that factor in.
Yeah, like the environment the plant is grown in, the specific genetics of the plant, even the way it's harvested and cured can all play a role.
Yeah, so even two plants that are labeled as the same strain
Hmm.
could have totally different effects.
Absolutely.
That's pretty wild when you think about it.
Yeah, it's all about the interplay between genetics and environment. The genetics are like the blueprint, but the environment is what really shapes how that blueprint is expressed.
It's like saying, all golden retrievers are exactly the same,
Right.
but we know that's not true.
No, not at all.
Every dog has their own personality.
Exactly.
And it's interesting, our sources use a more technical term for this.
We mean phenotype.
Yeah, phenotype, what exactly does that mean?
So phenotype basically refers to the observable characteristics of an organism, which are a result of both its genetic makeup, also known as genotype, and the environmental influences it's been exposed to.
So, like, two plants could have the same genotype but different phenotypes?
Exactly. Because they might have been grown in different conditions,
Yeah.
different soil, different temperatures, different light exposure.
Okay, so it's not enough to just know the name of the strain.
Right, it's just a starting point.
You really got to look deeper into, okay, how was this plant grown?
Exactly. You got to look at the whole picture.
What kind of environment was it in?
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to have good sources of information, like the ones we're looking at today.
Right, right. Well, we've got, we've got the big three, and then we've got this concept of phenotype, and then our sources bring up this other variety that I'm not that familiar with.
Oh, you mean ruderalis?
Yeah, ruderalis. What is that all about?
So ruderalis is kind of the black sheep of the cannabis family. It's not as well known as indica or sativa, but it has this really unique characteristic.
Okay.
It's what we call autoflowering.
Okay.
So unlike indica and sativa plants, which need specific light cycles to trigger flowering, ruderalis just flowers based on age.
So it doesn't matter how much light it gets?
Nope, it's like it has its own internal clock.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
So even if it's like, 24 hours of sunlight, it'll still flower when it's ready.
Exactly.
That's wild.
It's a game changer, especially for growers in places where the growing season is short or the weather is unpredictable.
Yeah, I can see that being really appealing to a lot of growers.
Oh, absolutely. And, breeders are starting to incorporate ruderalis genetics into other strains to create these auto-flowering varieties.
Oh, that's interesting. So they can kind of like pass on that trait
Exactly.
of not needing a specific light cycle.
Yep. It's pretty cool stuff.
All right, so we've got the big three. We've got this concept of phenotype. We've got this kind of mysterious ruderalis. But then our sources really emphasize how the growing techniques
Yeah.
can have a huge impact
Huge impact on
the
the
final product.
It's one of the most fascinating things about cannabis, I think. You can take two plants with the exact same genetics, but if you grow them in different environments or use different techniques, you'll end up with completely different results.
So give me some examples. What are some of the ways that growers can manipulate the environment?
Okay, well, let's start with light.
Okay.
Light is like the most crucial factor for plant growth,
Yeah.
right? So indoor growers can manipulate the light cycles to mimic different seasons or even extend the daytime for their plants.
So they can basically, like, trick the plant into thinking it's summer all the time.
Exactly, and that can lead to bigger plants, faster growth, and potentially higher yields.
Interesting.
And it's not just about the amount of light either. They can also adjust the spectrum of light to fine-tune the production of specific compounds within the plant.
Like, what kind of compounds are we talking about?
Well, there are cannabinoids, of course, like THC and CBD, but also terpenes.
Wait, hold on. Terpenes. What are those?
Oh, good question. Terpenes are basically the aromatic compounds that give different strains their unique scents and flavors. You know, like that citrusy smell or that piney aroma or that earthy, musky scent.
Oh, okay, yeah. So, like, when you smell a bud and it has that, like, skunky smell, that's terpenes.
Exactly. And terpenes aren't just about the smell and taste either.
Really?
Yeah, they're thought to have all sorts of therapeutic effects, and they might even influence how cannabinoids interact with our bodies.
Wait, so terpenes can actually change how we experience the effects of THC and CBD.
That's what some scientists believe, yeah. It's called the entourage effect.
The entourage effect. Okay, I've heard of that.
Basically, the idea is that the different compounds in the cannabis plant work together synergistically.
Okay.
So the presence of certain terpenes might enhance the effects of THC or maybe mellow them out a bit.
That's pretty fascinating.
It is, and it's one of the reasons why whole plant extracts are becoming so popular, because they contain the full spectrum of cannabinoids and terpenes.
So it's like you get the benefits of the whole entourage.
Exactly. It's like a symphony,
Okay.
all the instruments playing together to create a richer, more complex sound.
I like that analogy.
And just like with music, different terpene profiles can appeal to different people.
Right.
Some people might prefer those uplifting citrusy terpenes, while others might go for those more relaxing floral terpenes.
So if you're looking for a specific effect, it's worth paying attention to the terpene profile of the strain. Okay, so we've got light and terpenes. What about other things like temperature and nutrients? How do those play into all of this?
Well, temperature's huge. Cooler temperatures during flowering can lead to denser buds, and they can also enhance the production of certain terpenes.
So, like, if you want those really potent, flavorful buds, you want to keep it cool during flowering.
Exactly. And warmer temperatures might lead to looser, airier buds
Interesting.
with a different aroma profile.
So it's all about fine-tuning the environment.
Yeah, it's like being a plant conductor.
I like that.
You're orchestrating the whole process to get the results you want.
And what about nutrients?
Nutrients are essential for plant health and growth, of course.
Right.
And experienced growers know how to adjust the nutrient ratios to optimize different stages of the plant's life cycle.
So, like, they might give the plant more of certain nutrients during the vegetative stage to promote growth?
Exactly. And then adjust the ratios again during flowering to enhance bud development.
That's pretty amazing.
There's a lot of science and a lot of art.
Yeah, it's like a combination of the two.
And our sources mention this really cool technique called hydroponics.
Oh, yeah, hydroponics. What's that all about?
So hydroponics is basically growing plants without soil.
No soil.
Nope. The roots are suspended in a nutrient-rich water solution.
Wow.
It's a really popular technique among cannabis cultivators because it gives them a lot of control over the environment.
Yeah, I can see that. Like, you can control the nutrients really precisely
Exactly.
and the pH of the water and everything.
Yep, and it can also lead to faster growth and higher yields.
It sounds pretty high-tech.
It is, but it's also becoming more and more accessible to home growers.
That's cool.
Yeah, you can find all sorts of hydroponic systems online now.
So it's not just for, like, big commercial operations anymore.
Nope, anyone can try it out.
All right, well, I'm glad you brought up hydroponics because it makes me think about this whole idea of, manipulating the environment and fine-tuning everything.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me wonder about the ethics of it all.
It's a good point.
Like, are we pushing these plants too far?
Yeah, it's a question worth considering.
We've been focusing on the science and the techniques,
Right.
but it's important to remember that these are living organisms.
Absolutely.
And we have a responsibility to treat them with respect.
I think it's all about finding a balance,
Yeah,
between maximizing yields and preserving the integrity of the plant.
well said.
We don't want to turn cannabis into some kind of factory farmed commodity.
Right.
We want to honor the plant and its natural processes.
All right, so we've covered the big three. We've talked about phenotype. We've explored the world of ruderalis. We've delved into some pretty advanced cultivation techniques. But our sources also mention these things called specialized cultivars.
Oh, yeah, those are really interesting.
I'm curious to learn more about those.
Well, we've already touched on high CBD cultivars.
Right, the ones that don't get you high.
Yeah, exactly.
But what are some other examples of these specialized cultivars?
Well, some cultivars are bred for specific aromas or flavor profiles.
So, like, they might have a really strong citrus scent or maybe a more earthy, piney aroma.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's all thanks to targeted breeding efforts that focus on enhancing specific terpene profiles.
So it's like they're creating these, like, designer cannabis strains
Kind of, yeah.
tailored to specific tastes and preferences.
Exactly. And it's really opening up a whole new world of possibilities for cannabis connoisseurs.
That's pretty amazing.
It is, and it's just another example of how diverse and complex the world of cannabis is.
Well, speaking of complexity, we've talked about how it's not always enough to just know the name of the strain because of phenotype and all that.
Right.
So for the average consumer, how can they become more informed about the specific characteristics of the cannabis they're choosing?
That's a great question.
Because it can be kind of overwhelming, you know?
It can be.
There's so much information out there.
Yeah. So I think the key is to ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask your bud tender about the cultivation practices, the terpene profile, anything that will help you understand the potential effects.
So it's about being proactive
Exactly.
and doing your own research.
Yeah, and don't just rely on the label.
Right.
Sometimes the labels can be misleading.
Or just really generic.
Yeah, so talk to the people who know the product, you know?
The people who grew it or the people who are selling it.
Right.
They should be able to give you more specific information.
And if they can't, that's a red flag.
Yeah, good point.
You want to go to a dispensary where the staff is knowledgeable and passionate about cannabis,
That makes sense.
because they're the ones who can really help you find the right product for your needs.
Well said. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive so far.
We have.
From the basics of indica, sativa, and hybrids to this more complex concept of phenotype to the fascinating world of ruderalis.
Yeah, it's been a journey.
Some pretty advanced cultivation techniques.
That's good information.
But before we wrap things up for this part,
Okay.
I want to bring it back to the listener and their own personal cannabis journey. What's the key takeaway here?
I think the biggest takeaway is that the world of cannabis is incredibly diverse and nuanced.
Yeah.
It's not just about picking between indica or sativa anymore.
Right.
There's a whole spectrum of possibilities when it comes to strains, growing techniques, and ultimately the experiences you can have.
So it's about being informed
Absent questions.
and being open to new experiences.
You all said.
Because there's a whole world of cannabis out there waiting to be explored.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder that.
Okay.
And we'll be back with more
Sounds good.
on cannabis plant categories
Looking forward to it.
in just a bit.
All right. So we're talking about how growers can really influence a plant's traits through different techniques.
Right, like how they can adjust the temperature and the nutrients and all that.
Exactly. And another big one is pruning.
Pruning, okay. Yeah. So you know how some cannabis plants get really bushy and kind of out of control?
Yeah.
Well, pruning helps to manage that growth
Yeah.
and direct the plant's energy towards bud production,
So it's like giving the plant a haircut.
pretty much. And there are different pruning techniques depending on the grower's goals.
Like what? Give me an example.
Sure. So one technique is called topping, where you literally cut off the top of the plant.
Wow, really?
Yeah, it sounds kind of harsh, but it encourages the plant to grow more horizontally instead of vertically.
So it ends up being bushier.
Exactly. And that can be good for maximizing yield in a limited space.
That's pretty clever.
Yeah, growers have developed all sorts of techniques to optimize their plants.
I'm starting to realize that there's like a whole art and science to cannabis cultivation.
Oh, absolutely. It's way more than just sticking a seed in the ground and hoping for the best.
Right.
It's about understanding the plant's needs and responding to them.
And manipulating the environment to get the desired results.
Exactly.
It's like you said earlier, it's like being a plant conductor.
I like that analogy.
So, okay, we've covered a lot of ground here in terms of cultivation techniques.
We have.
But our sources also mentioned that different growing techniques can actually affect how a plant expresses its indica or sativa traits.
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting.
Okay, I need you to break that down for me.
So remember how we were talking about phenotype earlier?
Right, how the environment can influence the expression of a plant's genes.
Exactly. Well, it turns out that certain growing techniques can actually push a plant to express more indica-like traits or more sativa-like traits.
Wait, really? So, like, you could take an indica plant and make it grow more like a sativa.
Well, not exactly make it grow like a sativa, but you can definitely influence its characteristics in that direction.
Okay, how so?
Well, one example is light exposure.
Okay.
Indica plants typically thrive in shorter days with less light,
Right.
while sativa plants prefer longer days with more light.
Okay.
So if you grow an indica plant under long day conditions, it might start to exhibit some sativa-like traits.
Like what kind of traits are we talking about?
Well, it might grow taller and lankier, for example,
Interesting.
and its buds might become less dense and more airy, which is
Yeah.
more typical of a sativa.
So it's not like it's actually changing its genetic makeup,
Right, the genetics are still the same.
but it's expressing those genetics differently.
Exactly. It's all about how the environment interacts with the plant's genetic potential.
That's wild. I never would have guessed that you could actually
I know, it's kind of mind-blowing, right?
Yeah, it really challenges the simple categories of indica, sativa, hybrid,
It does.
because it shows that there's so much more nuance to it.
Absolutely.
So even if two plants are labeled as the same strain,
Mm-hmm.
if they were grown in different ways,
Yeah.
they could have totally different effects.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to understand the whole picture.
Right. The genetics, the environment, the cultivation techniques, it all plays a role.
It's all connected.
Well, this has definitely been eye-opening.
I'm glad to hear it.
I'm starting to see cannabis in a whole new light.
That's what we're here for.
So we've talked a lot about the science of cannabis, but let's bring it back to the consumer for a moment.
Okay.
How can all of this knowledge help people choose the right cannabis for their needs?
That's a great question, and I think the answer is education.
Okay.
The more you understand about the different categories, the different strains, the different growing techniques,
Yeah.
the better equipped you'll be to make informed decisions.
So it's not just about going to the dispensary and saying, give me the strongest stuff you got.
Right. It's about having a conversation with your bud tender.
Asking questions.
Exactly.
Finding out about the origins of the cannabis, how it was grown.
What kind of terpene profile it has.
All that good stuff.
Because ultimately the goal is to find the cannabis that's right for you.
Right, the cannabis that aligns with your individual needs and preferences.
Exactly. And that might take some experimentation,
Trying different strains.
different consumption methods.
Yeah.
But the journey is part of the fun,
I agree. It's all about exploration and discovery.
and enjoying the process.
Well said. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here,
I think so too.
but I feel like we've only scratched the surface.
Oh, there's always more to learn about cannabis.
Right. It's such a complex and fascinating plant.
It really is.
Well, on that note, we'll take a quick break,
Okay.
and we'll be back in just a bit to continue our deep dive.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we've been talking about how growing techniques can actually impact, how a plant expresses its indica or sativa traits.
Right. It's not just about the genetics. It's about how those genetics are expressed in the real world.
Yeah, like that whole phenotype thing we were talking about.
Exactly. So even if you have two plants that are technically the same strain,
Mm-hmm.
if they're grown in different environments or with different techniques,
Right.
they could end up having totally different effects.
Which is kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
It is. It really challenges those simple categories we often use, like just saying indica or sativa.
Totally. So it's like just knowing the strain name isn't enough anymore.
Nope. You got to look deeper.
You got into the whole backstory of the plant.
Exactly. Where was it grown? How was it cultivated? What kind of light did it get?
Yeah.
All of that plays a role.
It's almost like every cannabis plant is unique in a way.
In a sense, yeah. It's like a snowflake. No two are exactly alike.
That's a great way to put it.
And I think that's what makes cannabis so fascinating,
Yeah.
There's always something new to discover.
Right. You can't just learn everything there is to know about cannabis and then be done.
Nope. It's a constant journey of exploration.
And that's what we're trying to do here,
Mm-hmm.
Take our listeners on that journey with us.
Exactly. Help them understand the nuances and the complexities.
Because ultimately, I think that knowledge empowers people.
I agree.
It makes them more informed consumers.
It allows them to make choices that are truly aligned with their needs.
Well said. So, for all of you listening out there, I encourage you to embrace that journey.
Yeah, don't be afraid to ask questions.
Keep learning, keep exploring.
And most importantly, keep enjoying the wonderful world of cannabis.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We'll see you next time.